Sorry, I've got to slide that way.
You, sir,
Rowdon.
are podcasting.
Mate, we're tech savvy. Well, you're tech
we're
savvy.
getting
We're getting there. Yeah, well, it's I'm coming from the Cabana Bar and downtown, inner Western Sydney, Rhodes, my home away from home momentarily. How are you, mate?
I am good. It's really kind of comedic and ironic and a little bit tragic that you're in that damned environment because I'm sitting here. This is my Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening. Almost exactly now, 24 hours ago, I was training with this young kid at the gym, helping him with his powerlifting squats. While I hurt my knee, but that's a separate story. But anyway, I was selling him on the wonders of Australia and trying to explain just how fucking beautiful it is and how, there's a coffee shop on every corner and they're all fucking beautiful. And, and now here you are rubbing it in, you fucker.
Yeah. Well, let me just have a sip of coffee.
And by the way, just
which I know it's like
because I'm a terrible friend and I didn't mention this, the coffee you sent was wonderful and it's also gone.
Yeah, so that's my cue to load up the amount. It got there pretty quick actually. Like I tracked it and it was there within a week. I think it got there. But I didn't quite do the gourmet service when I ask you for something. I think they literally like US stop. Let's put it on a plane. Let's get this to Rowdon stat. I don't know how much you pay for when you send me stuff, but I literally get it from your place to mine in 2 to 3 days. Like
for the East Coast of the United States to the East. Yeah, the East Coast of the United States to the East Coast of Australia in 72 hours.
Yeah, like wow, like lucky you've got friends who in high places who send stuff down at right.
Yes, sir.
But thank you kindly to those guys and yourself. Well, I'll show you the cafe that you might be able to kind of see that in the background. We've got the cafe. There's upstairs. That's good shit. All sorts of stuff going on. But yeah, they're literally in this complex. There's there's probably 5 cafes, all of it pretty good coffee. Like it would be good enough for you. Actually, you prefer the one around the corner. It's kind of like for the guys that are listening. I mean, it's boring, but it's about you and I, so we can talk about coffee, I suppose. But I like the ashy blend that they put with milk. That's usually hard to drink if you don't put milk to soften it up, which you appreciate. But you also like the fancy Ethiopian and Colombian and single origin.
Yes, sir.
Which for me, it just fluffs around. It's kind of like I don't like all these sweet overtone. I just want to be hit in the face with a blend, a coffee blend that they put. They need milk for the average person. 99% of the population need to have some sort of, something to soften it up. But I love that. And I had to describe a friend once said it's kind of ashy, like it's at the bottom of an ashtray. When you put some water in, swish it around, and chuck it in a cup. And that's my deal. I like it really. That's coffee. Some people that hadn't tried coffee before, they'll be like, "Oh, that's not for me." But which you like at times too.
100%. You've had coffee at my kitchen table, so you are aware of the width and birth of coffee that comes from here. Yeah.
Yeah, and if anyone that follows you in any way, shape, or form, I mean, it's a post about the stuff, the world that you live in, performance enhanced, everything, and then there'll be a copy. Just as much detail as anyone about coffee. In fact, you probably confess that coffee is something that you probably know actually more about, and you know a lot about everything else. So
I think that's true.
True. Yeah, well, I thought, considering my part of the world is season B, which the shows, I mean, you got the Olympia coming up, far more significant than the shows we've got here. And it was interesting. I spoke to an athlete. I went on behalf of a colleague. He couldn't get there, and I went to Queensland. So the Dean McKillop Flex Success, he used to reside there. Now he travels the world, doing what he does. But Queensland, you have been to. We've ran a seminar up there, but I flew up for the day and had an athlete. We actually we'll unpack all this, and I want to dive into peak weeking, dot I's, cross T's, and that type of stuff. But hopefully the listeners might find that a little interesting. I know there would be quite a few that, even if they don't jump up on stage, they might have the beach. They go on holiday and they might want to peak for it, or a festival for, cringe. Some guys and girls get ready for festivals and peak like they do a physique show. But I went up and there was an athlete actually there, helped a friend, just help him pump him up backstage and stuff and reassure him it was all looking good. And he spoke about, the Pro League, which is kind of here as NPC/Pro League for NPC. I don't know if they're branding it Pro League in the US as well, but it's an NPC in Australia basically. And he was like, yeah, I'll this federation because, one day I could win my division and then do well, get a pro card and end up at the Olympia stage. And he's just beginning. I think it was it might have been his first show. And I was, well, yeah, look, theoretically, yeah, that would be the stepping stone, but few and far between those that actually have the genetic disposition to make it that far, and certainly onto Olympia stage. And I know you've helped quite a few up there. I know it's kind of hush hush, but it's not always, people don't always know who you're working with. Have you got anyone that you don't have to mention names? Are there anyone that is competing in the Olympia that you are giving a hand to? Not that to mention it, but or having some influence.
I was just going to say, it's kind of more this is year where it's kind of, I have consulted with, I have had communications with, probably no exaggeration, probably 4 or 5 people. Roman Fritz, the German pro, is probably going to stay with us leading up to the show. So, I think that probably counts.
Yeah, right. Wow.
But by no means, please, by no means am I taking credit for anything he's done. He is a magnificent, standalone pro. He's done almost everything himself, but he does follow Mircea and I and Team EvilGSP. And because of that, he reached out actually because he just kind of lacked resources in the United States. And that led us to, that just kind of led us to, well, shit, we're going to be there. Why don't we just, pick you up at the airport and lead you out?
Now, wait a second. Did Roman take my spot? At the Airbnb, I was assured that there was a bed, and tag along, we'll chip in for
100%.
If I've been replaced by an IFBB pro, that's okay.
No, your window is still open.
Okay, cool. Maybe we'll see. Well, Roman, interestingly, from what I can tell, I've been watching a few guys critique the shows that he's just done. He's doing like 1 billion shows. He must be Iron Man, literally. But seasoned veteran, like you pointed out. I don't know a lot about him, but crazy lower. His wheels are just out of control and conditioned off. I think everyone's kind of tipping the hat to the most conditioned at the shows he's done.
100%.
Needs a little more meat up top, it looks like, to be really mix it with the big boys. But I've heard he's like the best he's looked. Maybe I'm not saying it because he started following Team EvilGSP, but GSP.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is, like so many kind of standalone guys, which I really would emphasize he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very, very self-driven, very self-learned, has had very limited interaction with coaches, which is an amazing testament to his, his skill, his craft, all of that. But I also think it can maybe slow down the learning curve sometimes because you're not, getting kind of wildly different outside opinions, which can be very both valuable and detrimental. But I think in his case, it's kept him a little narrow, and he hasn't really expanded until recently. And I think that's helped him a lot.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, season B, getting back to what I was talking about. So I've got a few athletes. So I'm very fortunate, and you know me, I'm very humbled to be able to do what I do, and I don't think it's work. I mean, I fluff around on a laptop and count a few reps and make sure technique is good. I know there's billions of people out in the world that do have to actually do work, and I think you would probably say something similar. As much as we're busy all the time, But I'm fortunate to have a few on stage and a few natural athletes, which are what they are, and then a few of the guys that have pulled the trigger on stepping up and having a dance in an enhanced show. So I've got a mix of both. But So yeah, I think this weekend, I think it might be. I had one last weekend. We did a trial run for him prior to last week, and then he has 3 weeks between that show and nationals, which we got back to Queensland for. So that was the Queensland State show up there. That all went well. He won novice and then got third in opens, just beat by guys that were a bit bigger. But he, which is a multitude of factors, of course, the conditioning that someone can present on stage, and you'll be the first to say, things like skin quality. Do you have thin skin? As much as you can manipulate the variables, he's just, he's got that kind of that dry, thin skin. So he, I was with I was actually with Logan Robson, who I think he came up to our Queensland. He's an IFBB pro. He's competing at the Legion Sports, and then Aaron Pilates is there too. And it was pretty much a Bihu, who's who. There were pros left, right, and center. A lot of the guys that came to our seminar that we did up there, actually. But one of the boys was saying that the athlete I was involved with was probably one of the more conditioned guys on stage. That was awesome that we presented that, but just out muscled, which kind of happens. So what I thought we might kind of go through is just peak wiki type stuff. I know you have your way of doing things, and might run through that. And I want to get into the whole potassium, manipulating potassium. I know that's not something you do, but I want to touch on that because I did get we'll typically do, I should say, I mean, I shouldn't assume that I know exactly what you are doing. I suppose there's time and a place for everything, but in a general sense, when we have discussed potassium, it's kind of like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of like, well, the body's going to be pretty good at regulating potassium, eat some, don't eat just, have some varied food sources that undoubtedly will have potassium. I think, you throw some fruit in when you're carving up and you're pretty much going to have enough potassium to do the job. But I wanted to touch on that because I know there are some that will, and maybe it's because the environment they know doesn't have much potassium. For example, they're loading with white rice, and I think I had a bit of a sniff around, but it doesn't have much potassium. But if you had potato, then you have tons of potassium. So I suppose it's really contextual and dependent on what you're doing. But maybe we could touch on that if you want to kind of, we could start the conversation by going there, because I was sent a question from an athlete that I am involved with, and he's like, hey, and he sent a YouTube clip, and it was someone, saying, got to do this and you got to do that on potassium supplementation, I think, and spoke about pushing things in and out the cell and trying to move water around, which you're probably going to say the first thing is, it's like, well, these are things we're trying to do, and it's rare that you get one up on the body, and if you do, it's only momentarily.
Exactly.
So yeah, like, do you want to talk about the role of potassium, because I know it's the potassium sodium pump kind of thing going on, and it's they seesaw. And
before that, I think the way to handle this is the before that. For instance, this whole sodium or potassium loading. People have maybe a misconception of what's going on there. It's sort of like pH, like people talking about such and such is acidifies or not the body, or alkalizes the body, or that sort of thing. The reality is, cells, if they're going to stay alive, live in a very narrow pH range. Now, the body may do cartwheels to maintain that value, but the reality is the actual value doesn't change very much. The same thing applies to sodium and potassium. Your body may go to just great lengths to get rid of or retain, but the reality is your blood plasma sodium and potassium are not allowed to change very much. Literally, if they change too much, it's fatal. I'm not joking. If your potassium moves above a certain value, something like maybe a normal potassium is like maybe 4.5 to 5, what they call MEQs, milli equivalents. A number like potentially a number like 8 is life threatening. So this whole loading and not loading isn't really about changing the value. It's more about causing your body to go to efforts to maintain the value. For instance, you said something to the effect of, well, you don't really manipulate potassium. That's true. Sort of. I will go through what I do in a second. I'll give it the kind of the capsule version, and you can ask me to expand where we need to, or not at all.
Yep.
But to kind of clarify, I suggest people manipulate sodium and water. During a carb depletion window, I suggest a water and sodium load. Now, what that does is a couple of things at the actual kind of urination level. By water loading, it trips something called the aldosterone loop. And basically what it means is you're getting so much hydration, your body just sort of turns on a natural diuresis, or like way too much water, let's get it the fuck out of here, and just sort of turns on this diuresis loop.
Yep.
Now, while you're doing that,
antidiuretic hormone in there as well.
That's correct. Now, what I suggest is, whilst you're doing that, you consume an inordinate amount of potassium, or sodium rather, about 1.5 times normal. And what that does, you wouldn't immediately jump to this conclusion, but by raising your sodium, it does two things. One, it makes the body very comfortable releasing sodium because it's getting the signal, there's a lot, we don't need to hoard this thing. So the body becomes somewhat comfortable with releasing sodium. Now, at the same time, because sodium is so high, the body does turn on a mechanism to hoard potassium. Because again, your body wants a ratio more than it wants a value. So it's getting rid of sodium and meanwhile retaining, or in biological terms, what's called conserving. It's conserving potassium. So putting in lots of water, putting in lots of sodium. Right. Meanwhile, the body is hoarding potassium. But the difference is the mechanisms that go into that hoarding and that urination are a little slow on the uptake. However, the pie hole is very, very controllable. So you can shut the pie hole instantly, but the biological mechanisms continue on. So what happens is drink lots of water, eat lots of sodium, release it, hoard potassium, stop drinking sodium and potassium, or sodium and water. The body's still comfortable releasing it, plus it has this hoard of potassium. So the sodium and potassium kind of pass each other in the night because there's two different mechanisms controlled by two different mechanisms. So what you get for a very transient period of time is an environment where potassium is high, sodium is lowering, and water is lowering via diuresis. So you have this momentary environment, and as you said, the key word is momentary, 24 to 36 hours, where water wants to be inside the cells, does not want to be outside of the cells, and that's because potassium gradient is higher than sodium gradient momentarily. So in a way, I do manipulate potassium, but I do it by manipulating sodium.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then with more potassium in the muscle cell we're referring to, that's going to retain more glycogen, more sodium in there as well, and more sodium or water.
Well, right. Sodium's high, but it is lowering. There's a difference between low and lowering. That's the key. You don't really want sodium low. You just want the direction of the two to be changing. You want potassium to be going up and sodium to be going down. Even if they're actually this far apart, it's the direction more than the values.
Yeah, so either a short duration or...
And then also remember, while this is then happening with the, you turn off the mechanism, this is also the window where we now start to input carbs, which then cause a retention of intracellular. So glycogen only exists in the cells, actually in the cross-sectional area. So the body is taking what little water is left, binding it to carbohydrates, and putting it into muscle cells. So you've got this sort of environment where you're a little dehydrated, but yet prioritizing muscle volume.
Plump in the muscle.
Right.
Technical term, plump muscle.
And then I don't know if you want me to go down this road, but I will also say that whole sodium potassium thing, being, kind of who I am, kind of being the drug guy, I would also maybe not, I almost said suggest, that's terrible language. I would also point out that applying a low-grade potassium-sparing diuretic like, say, aldactone would exaggerate this process from a pharmacological point of view. So now you've got a weak, very mild, maybe even one might say bad diuretic, but it happens to be very good at conserving potassium
in that muscle cell. Then you probably the theatrics of strategically timed Lasix to even things up, so you're ready to dance.
Correct.
On game day. We'll probably go there in a second. So the potassium, what about from a loading carbohydrate perspective? Like you've manipulated the sodium, so that indirectly has pulled more potassium, but do you have to be mindful of, like I mentioned, if you're loading on or consuming foods that are very low in potassium, do we supplement potassium, or we just your suggestion will be more, well, you eat your fruits, you eat your veggies, that's going to have potassium, and you're sweet, there's plenty from the food, or how do we navigate through that to ensure that potassium is there to actually store?
Right. Well, two things on that. One, it's there. If you're eating reasonably sensible, bodybuilding foods, there's a volume of potassium. It's not as if you're bereft or, unless you're living on, fucking canned tuna fish and, seltzer water, there's some potassium about. So you're okay. Now, what I would say is, again, it comes back to that sort of what I always reference, at least in my mind, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, in that what foods are you going to carb up on? Now, admittedly, there's always the asshole that's like, oh, Fruity Pebbles. Okay, well, fuck him. But most people are carbing up on fruit, rice, and potatoes. Those are kind of universally the foods you would use. Again, unless you're like that random person that's like has such digestive trouble that they use Vitargo or something like that. And if you're using a specialized food, you're going to have specialized problems. There's no way around that. But white rice, white potatoes, and relatively glycemic fruits, which are kind of the staples of this process, they're somewhere between potassium bearing and outright potassium rich. I mean, white potatoes are one of the best sources of potassium you can get in your diet. And rice isn't magnificent, but it does have some. So I although I agree with you in the you better have some potassium, I kind of discount and disregard that, because what are you eating? Like what you know what I mean? Unless you're living on honey and
Yeah, and that's kind of what I preface this, that the nutritional staples that you've already implemented leading into this point in time with an athlete you're working, it's all covered anyway. But all right.
Which by the way is I never liked to take the whole sides on like the if it fits your milligrams or whatever, the IFYM, whatever, all that bullshit.
And you get on the website,
Right. I try not to take sides on that, because I really genuinely do see it both ways and those sorts of things. But when you really press me, and have, I don't want to say non-professional, but let's say casual conversations on the topic, you'll find I almost universally just lean toward, why don't you just do it right and eat real foods? Why don't you? Like, you got to give me a compelling reason why you're taking that shortcut. I have heard compelling reasons, but they're fucking rare. Most of the time, not eating, white rice, white potatoes, green vegetables, and fucking lean meats. Most of the time, if there's an answer other than that, it's because you're fucking lazy or you think you're cleverer than you actually are.
Yeah. Or you're complicating something that isn't complicated.
Exactly.
It's interesting. On that point, we'll come back to the topic of discussion in 2 seconds. But I time and time again come along and I start coaching an athlete. I mean, I refer to everyone as athletes, and you'd probably say, well, they're athletes. I work with athletes, you do not. But regardless, and
I do work with athletes and bodybuilders. There's a difference. I work with athletes, and bodybuilders.
We'll clarify that for the audience. And all of the bodybuilders are beating their chest. I'm an athlete. And so, well, I agree. I agree with you because I think it conjures up tons of things that are really good for a physique prep. Athletes, follow plans. They get shit done. They don't give up. They see it process through. So that's kind of why I go there. But I understand you play on words. And anyone that knows you, if they don't, watch some of your stuff and you're very particular about the definition of words. So we'll let that one slide. But anyway, this lady, she's a bit older, not that it's anything to do with it, but just cleaned her diet up. She just took out, and not that dairy, and you don't have issues with dairy, not that dairy or gluten or any things that are issues for a lot of people, but just my standard low FODMAP, high protein, rices, potatoes, like you said, some fruits, lots of veggies, and all of a sudden she hasn't had migraines that she's had for the last 30 years, dropped not that we're trying to drop weight, it's theoretical baseline calories, but her body weight's dropped, skin folds, I've checked it the last 3 weeks, they've dropped 10 mils a week, and she's been eating kind of more food than what she did previously. And all I did was revert from something that was probably more of a flexible, she was vaguely tracking calories, but let's call it more of a if it fits your macros. And you don't know what you don't know. So she didn't know that, maybe something she was having, and I'm not saying it was the food or the training, maybe coincidentally something else changed, and maybe she drinks a bit more water now because I gave her a target, and that's what stopped the headaches. But feeling absolutely fantastic, aches and pains are gone and no headache. And all she did was kind of just eat what you are suggesting. So I don't know, man. It's time and time again, I do see it have significant impact. And those that are kind of existing in that world don't know any different. So it's kind of like, well, you never step out of that world, so you don't know if you could actually. Then all of a sudden, I'm not saying this is universal, but they don't, their elbows don't get sore. The training capacity goes up, and they can do more work in the gym, and yada yada yada. Potentially, it's just interesting.
I don't want to get too far off point, but I just recently caught a few minutes of a podcast, some notable coaches talking about the wonders of a broad diet, getting food variety, and I've preached that about protein sources. I have, so fair play.
Yep.
But they were taking it to the point of, a variety of fruits, a variety of green vegetables, all these things. And all of the points they were making, 100% of the points, oxidative stresses, free radicals, all the, micronutrition, density, all of the points they were making, I agree with. But at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, I still went, and I still think it's wrong. And when I say wrong, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to be a dick like, oh, I'm so much smarter than everyone else. I know, No. What I mean is when it comes to bodybuilding and very, very tightly controlled diets, I find that the more variety you offer, the easier it is to either justify or just stumble into an inappropriate choice. I really think if you just limit the choices, it limits the opportunity for fuckery. Broccoli is fucking broccoli. If it's not broccoli, don't put it in your fucking hole. That makes it really simple. It's not broccoli or asparagus or snap peas or sugar. No. If you can't point at it and say it's broccoli, no. Nay.
Yeah.
That really trims shit down.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you would remember seminar we did in Melbourne for you, the last one, and you kind of got me up to talk about how I do nutrition.
Oh yeah.
Now I do it,
and that was a damn fine performance from you, if I may say.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. But it was in direct contrast. Like you guys just kind of done all yours, like Mitch and yourself, and put a compelling argument. Everyone's like, yep, they got their pads out. And then I came up, and it's just like a yin to your yang. And I said, well, what I do is X, Y, Z. I ran through, and it's kind of there is variety with what I do, but it was kind of like, no, I do this. These are the goalposts. And since then, I have gone a more, okay, these are the goalposts. This is what I recommend. I'm not a nutritionist. This is just a guide. But here's the plan. Or we track in, I used a chronometer, but I don't mind if I use MyFitnessPal, but it's just tracking apps. I said, or you can have something that hits the macros. These are the macros. This is the document I want you to track it on. You can show me the food choices and, at check-in and all this type of stuff. And so some kind of no, just flaps on. No, just tell me what to eat. I'll follow your plan. I don't want to, have this flexibility. But some have come to the party and opted, but they've gone back to exactly what I put in because they just kind of said, look, I worked with you before. And you know what? I didn't want to think about food choice. I just want it. This is what, just tell me what to do. Like, I worry about other shit in my world. Like, I don't want to. And now they're like, well, these are the calories. So they're still, this is the plan. And then some days they would mix and mishmash of things. And it was just, it was just such a kind of, it just confused the whole situation for them. And yeah, they didn't necessarily, I don't know whether the results were any different. It was still, but from a simplistic, less opportunity for
implementation point of view.
Yeah, it was just, I said, well, you can follow it. I still recommend this. That's in Drive. If you want to then be creative, that's on you. This is
right.
When the words that come out of my mouth, this is what I recommend for you. However, if you want on some days to be more flexible, you can peel some calories back, spend some more with dinner. You can go out with and I think it's good for long-term preps. Those guys that are short, aggressive, 12, 18 weeks coming into the show, 20 weeks odd. Great. But if it's like a 52-week prep, then I think that flexibility does definitely have its place. But yeah, you got to know how to use those tools, I suppose. But anyway, let's get back into peak week. So potassium, is that needed? I'm assuming it is there, but is it from a carb loading? Like, if you haven't chosen those things and you haven't supplemented potassium, because Dr. Scott Stevenson mentioned that there's interplay and we need potassium to load effectively as well. So we also shooting ourselves in the foot if we don't eat some things with potassium, at least have a vague awareness. Not that you.
Again, I think the answer to your specific question, pedantically, is yes. One must make sure there's potassium on hand. But again, my argument is no, because 99% chance that the whole food carb source that you're eating comes with its own potassium. So, unless you are for some reason in a niche carbohydrate, like I said, like Vitargo or something where it's the only thing you can put down without having gastric problems. Those people exist. You've dealt with them. But if you're carbing up with the rice, the potato, the yam, the rice cakes that everyone else is, no, you don't really have an issue because that's part and parcel of the foods you're eating.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that was kind of, I knew we had discussed that, and that was what I meant, that you don't really and I think what I might also be misinterpreting, like when I see people, when you see something posted and I don't engage, and I kind of just graze social media. I don't play the game. You definitely don't play the game, but I will have a look, and then you'll see potassium X amount of milligrams per day. It's like, ooh, am I missing? I haven't given the guys potassium recommendations. Am I missing something? And I think it has come from that flexible dieting where things are tracked, and they have that data. If you run it through MyFitnessPal, you can see a certain amount of potassium, and then if you were having Vitargo, you would see that, well, shit, my potassium is 0. I better supplement some because we need at least RDI to load what we're going to do and all that type of stuff. So I think that's, maybe I'm getting caught up in the minutia. I just wanted to run it past yourself.
And this is not shameless marketing. This is relevant to the conversation. The nutrition book, which I almost said I wrote, but the reality is my team and I wrote it. My ideas, my lead, whatever, but quite sincerely, the team collectively wrote the book. So I don't want to say the book I wrote. The book we wrote. We went out of our way to supply. Now, this is intended for off-season. The on-season is a little different, but the principle's the same. We went out of our way to give hard sodium and potassium recommendations. So I will parrot that here and now. I suggest in an off-season, for every kilocalorie you consume, you should consume 2 milligrams of sodium. So you have, let's just say, a 4,000 calorie diet. You should have an 8,000 milligram or 8 gram daily intake of sodium. As much as that sounds like a big number, if you eat the most benign, banal foods, you're getting a lot of that. Like, that is not a lot of added sodium, really. So, and then potassium, exactly half of that. 1 milligram of potassium per kilocalorie consumed.
Okay.
So,
all right, very
a
good.
4,000 calorie
And that's
diet, you
probably-
should have about 8 grams of sodium and about 4 grams of potassium.
And that's probably pretty close to RDI kind of, you know. And if you were
Well,
to
I mean, the
exaggerate,
RDA only goes to, what, 2,000 calorie diet or something?
yeah. So like, yeah, it's more than
But
what
if
they
you
would
double
suggest.
it, right?
You're working with, yeah. So like, it probably, you know, much like I do 10 to 20 sets per body part, you do 100, 120 sets max over the week, but you do the math across, you know, get your
Same thing.
do all the numbers and such. Same thing. Yeah, cool. All right. Okay, so let's fast forward into what about, and I've seen, and I hear this time and time again, you know, the guys don't use diuretics, or you see someone that has used the diuretic, and that's absolutely fine. I know. And again, to reference the guys, I love Dr. Stevenson. You guys haven't had an interaction. I'm still trying to kind of coax him into doing some sort of podcast with you. I think that would be a real battle of the minds, which would be awesome. But he doesn't touch the pharmaceutical. He does everything, throws everything, including the kitchen sink, to do it in a non-pharmaceutically enhanced way. But you do hear time and time again that, you know, when I don't touch the diuretic because I come in flat, I lose my fullness, and it's probably contextual. They haven't done the preparation like what we've kind of loosely just discussed, an abundance of potassium stored, ready to rock and roll. But tell me, like, if you have used something like a Lasix, which does pull potassium, and you know you do see someone really flat, and they kind of try and rectify things on the comp day, or try and pump up, and they just cannot for the life of them get any kind of life in the muscle. They're throwing salt in, they got carbs, they're eating a chocky bar, they go chomp on a pizza, nothing's happening, they're just not getting a pump. Is that
coconut water?
Are you kind of seeing there's always a solution. You always have a plan B, C, and D. But are we seeing is that kind of what really low potassium stores would look like? Like, if you dig
100%.
around and you come in with low potassium, and is it harder to kind of rectify that rather than sodium? Like, once that ship sailed, is it tricky to get
it is.
You're where you want it then?
You're right, because in nature, literally in the world we live in, sodium is a much more transient and easier to find nutrient. You salt water, there's salt in blood, there's salt in meat, there's salts. When I say salt, I'm using the common vernacular. Technically, sodium and potassium are both salts, but I'm using the diminutive for sodium. Sodium is a thing that's very, very easy to find. So because of that, your body has much looser mechanisms. It's much easier to get rid of it, much easier to retain it. It's much more of a flexible mechanism. Potassium, on the other hand, is a little more judicious in nature. So your body is much more sensitive with it. And it's also a little more dangerous, if you will. It's very, very difficult to kill yourself with sodium. It is not entirely impossible to kill yourself with potassium. So because of that, your body does have a sort of a rate limiting mechanism that you can only drive potassium in at a given rate.
And vice versa, can pull it out at a given rate as well, I suppose. It wouldn't liberate
exactly. Your body's only willing to absorb or give away potassium at a controlled rate because it's a much more dangerous and necessary resource. Sodium is much more free because it's much more available.
That makes perfect sense.
To come full circle to what you're getting at is, yes, if you fucked up your potassium values, it is a much harder thing to fix. And that is why I actually mentioned coconut water for two reasons. One, water, that's going to be important. Potassium will not move without hydration. So a beverage. And it just so happens that the format, you say potassium, but the reality is potassium doesn't exist in its free form. It's potassium something, potassium citrate, lactate, gluconate, whatever. The format of potassium in coconut is particularly absorbable. So if you ever find yourself in a potassium deficit, coconut water is literally medicine. And when I say that, I don't joke. During World War II, when medicine was very rare, intravenous coconut water was actually used in place of intravenous electrolytes. I am not
Rod's
kidding.
comes through with just random shit that I've never even. Wow.
That is 100. Please go behind me and verify that. That is true.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, I take a message. IV coconut water on comp day. Got it. All right. So coconut water, throw that in the bag of tricks. If you do dance with the devil in regards to manipulating variables. Now, obviously, we're not encouraging people to do it, but people are going to do it. So, an awareness of what's happening, and maybe don't do it aggressively, because, you will not only probably feel pretty shit, and like you said, there can be some significant health consequences as a result of, but you might also just all your hard work look, not look how you want to look on competition day. Okay, so coconut water and okay, pumping up on comp day. I mean, I know we've kind of skipped and danced around, and it'd probably be another hour for us to talk about the theatrics of coming down and manipulating things. But the gist of it is there's a tapering sodium for you and water and carbohydrates coming in. Do you competition day? What are the nutrients? Do you bother trying to have some potassium rich kind of? I know we've discussed figs are really high, or a banana or something like that. I mean, they're pretty easy to chuck in the bag. Like, what do you like to do to? Let's assume it's all gone well and we're nice and dry and we've kind of tracked everything and the body weights come down nicely, but we need a little more zip. I mean, what should we be looking at on comp morning? Are we looking at kind of a dry, tight looking physique at that point, or is that still potentially coming? I suppose it depends on what you've done. And then to get a pump, what's your go-to? What do you like to do? Just give us guys some little tricks and tidbits.
Okay, here's what I would recommend on that point. I will answer all of your questions, but I want to answer them by a sort of this preface of I have a strong recommendation. If you are a bodybuilder, you are a physique competitor, and you are working with a coach, ask them very specifically, and this is not me trying to be a dick. This is me trying to save you anxiety. Ask them very specific, what should be the unfolding of events?
Yes.
What I mean by that is, if the coach is expecting you to look your absolute best first thing in the morning, they should tell you that. If they're expecting you to wake up a little watery and dry out through the day, they should tell you that. Because knowing when you look and you're like, holy shit, am I supposed to look like this? That's a point of anxiety. And simply knowing the expectation will change your attitude about everything. So I strongly recommend that coach and athlete have a dialogue to where the coach gives you this idea, like, first thing in the morning, you're going to be a little off. You're going to get up. You're going to shower. You're going to have a cup of coffee. It's going to get better. Around 2 hours after you're awake, we're going to look at, and then 2 hours later, we're going to look at, and then we're going to decide food, carbohydrate, whatever. I think that alone will lower cortisol and stress and everything else to the point where, oh shit. So now, having said that, if you were to ask me, this is what I would expect to happen visually. I would expect you to wake up very tight and dry, very flat. I would expect you through the morning to get fuller, but a little softer, a little less tight. The fullness will peak about halfway between morning and stage, waking and stage. And then from there, fullness stays, tightness returns. So that's the roller coaster ride I expect. Flat and tight, full and soft, as full and tight as the two can come together. So that's the environment I expect. But just telling the athlete that gives them a sort of a like, yay, I'm flat. Whereas most people are like, oh, fuck, I'm flat. Like, what the? Changing the expectation kind of changes the mental roller coaster that goes with the physical roller coaster. I think that's important. Or at least, let me word it this way. It's important to me in the way I do things. I would feel very bad throwing an athlete out there without that information.
No, I think that's gold. Like, that's probably some of the best content I've heard this morning. Like, just having that discussion and what to expect, because you often do get that kind of question. All right. So
So now
go through what you do.
the kind of bow tie around that. Now, keep in mind, if this same question was asked of you or, fucking Milo Saishev or anyone else, you would get a different answer for a reason. So when you're asking me, my attitude on food and water the day of is simply minimum necessary. Carb up should, roughly speaking, be done. Water manipulation should roughly be done. I'm looking at foods day of are minimal in volume and, most importantly, minimally invasive. I only want you to put things in your face that you are super comfortable will not offend. For instance, I'm thinking morning, slice or two of fruit, a poached egg, sip of coffee, like minimal stuff you've eaten your whole life. You like it, you love it, you know it. Minimal food volume, and then super light, minimal additional ions. You're not salting it. You're not just minimal. And then in your sort of first aid kit, I would suggest you have some sodium, some coconut water, some pretty aggressive carbs, whether it's Vitargo or honey or a jar of jam,
maple syrup.
Maple syrup, you love that. I love that. Sure. Then, when you mentioned pumping up specifically, your backstage, everything's gone to T. The plan has unfolded. You're backstage. Based on your body weight, I want you to have about 10 milliliters. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. About 5 milliliters per kilogram of body weight. So let's say you're 100 kilos, that's 500 mils. Super simple math. I want you to have a bottle of spring water, distilled water, whatever, 500 mils. In it, I want you to put 1 gram of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. So again, 100 grams carbs in there. Probably a powder Vitargo, maybe even some Vitargo and maybe some full-on table sugar. Just carbs, sweet, tasty, nice. Fruit juice would work. A crushed baby aspirin, 5 milligrams of crushed Viagra. If you have access to some taurine, 500 milligrams to a gram of taurine, a little bit of caffeine. A lot of times I'll say, hang up on the caffeine. We'll just add a shot of espresso, as a second beverage. But nonetheless, in this window of time, there's some caffeine involved. Shake, the last addition to that. And when I say the last addition, I mean you add it like it's time, and I'll explain time. I also then want 1 teaspoon of table salt, sodium chloride.
Yep.
Give it a shake, get it dissolved. You sip that literally while you are pumping up. So 30-ish minutes maximum before you expect to hit the stage.
Sure.
Typically, I will tell people, when you think you're 30 minutes out from the stage, the reality is you're probably 60 minutes out from the stage. So
I would have said 2 hours, but go 30 minutes, 60. Yeah, I'll take that.
So when you think it's 30 minutes, that's the soonest you want to do this. And same thing, I would give people an expectation. I'd say, you're gonna shake, you're gonna mix all this up. You're gonna like be sitting there on the edge of your seat. You're gonna be like, oh, it's time. You're gonna drink it. The minute it hits your stomach, you're gonna break out in a sweat. That's good. Don't panic. You're gonna break out in a sweat. Not crazy, but you'll notice it. You're gonna get vascular. Run with it. Get into the brightest lights you can find. Pump up as violently as you can. And then just tap your foot and wait for your time on stage. There's nothing more you can do.
So you're kind of pumping up during that 30 minutes, like you're just kind of going through the lateral raise, whatever the pump up process is until your time on stage. Then
exactly. Which, by the way, I also suggest you have a routine. Like, that's not, again, a thing you just kind of do like, oh, just pump up. You and your coach should have a plan. Thou shalt do 10 push-ups, 10 deep bends. Thou shalt do 5 double biceps. You should do some dumbbell curls. Like, there should be a strategy. It's not just willy-nilly like, oh, I like this. Like, but follow the plan. Sip the beverage. Be done with the beverage. Wipe off your beard. You're ready to hit the stage. That's it. There's nothing more. You have done all you can do.
Yep. Yeah, very good, very good. just run through. So we got the little bit of caffeine, bit of taurine, the aspirin. These are all kind of, you found that there's a synergy between them. They're all going to do
aspirin,
slightly different levers.
Right. Baby aspirin, Cialis and Viagra. I prefer Cialis as a drug in general, but for this sort of fast action, Viagra is a much better tool.
Quicker.
So, yeah, exactly. 20 to 60 milligrams, depending on your size and that sort of thing. Basically, a dose of Viagra. People can get away with a dose as low as 50, and some people need 100. So whatever is a sensible dose. Crushed, dissolved into water. Caffeine, aspirin, Viagra, taurine, and then the sodium,
carbs, the salt.
That's it. Carbs and salt.
What about chucking in a little citrulline if you wanted? I know some people
again
do like vasodilator, but you're going to get all.
I find that
superseding it.
Yeah, I find that taurine pretty much covers that, but same idea. And you can get as elaborate as you want with your over-the-counter, fuckery. Personally, I think it's wildly overwhelmed by drugs and behavior, but I wouldn't poo-poo it at all.
Interesting. And then that's what I do for the guys. I design a backstage pump up, so it's like
exactly X
amount of lateral, front, push-ups.
Yep. It's a workout like any other. It should be scripted, 100%.
And what I also recommend is, in regards to duration of pump up, and this was after discussion again with Scott Stevenson, have a look at when you look best in your workout. Like, do you look good 10, 15 minutes in, or at the end you look a little bit defeated and flatten out, or do you always look best at the end of the workout? You just pop into hell and then, get an idea of how long to kind of gauge that process coming into stage. I think that can be quite beneficial too. And you can trial that leading into it.
And the only other thing I would say there, and you actually have zero concern with this. You're in Australia. It's beautiful. The weather's always nice. But the other thing I would warn people is about getting cold. North America, you do a contest in November, it can actually be legitimately cold. Like, it can be, 5-10 degrees Celsius. Like, it can be cool. So, for what it's worth, for the worldwide audience listening, do go out of your way to be in a warm environment, even if that means, going somewhere else. If you can pull that off, I've seen people, pump it up in a boiler room and a fucking closet, even. Like, just find a nice warm environment, because that will genuinely help vasodilation and help quite literally warming up.
Blood flow, And what I tend to do, and pretty much what you said, you said hit a few double by. I get them to do like whatever sequence of pumping up, and then we run through mandatories. It's like, hey, front double, back double, hit your poses, rest, 100%. Get your breath back, let's do it again, and keep that pump there. All right, let's go to post stage. They've let's assume it's not what you guys do in the US is a pain in the butt. You got pre and finals, and you got time. At least you got time to dry back out, or and this will be a topic for a different discussion, the manipulation of using pharmaceutical diuretics. I didn't really want to get into that today. I just wanted to mention that they can be involved, and if people are interested, we could go there. But let's assume they're done and dusted. What do you kind of do? I usually tell the guys, let's get some water in. Obviously, water is generally restricted, to a certain amount. Like you said, minimal, just enough. If they're thirsty, they'll have a sip, but you're not loading water until that time. That half an hour, 45 minutes pre-stage. What about when all's said and done? Is there any kind of, do you coconut water then? Do you mandatory throw that in? Or what do you like to say post-stage? They've done, places are whatever. Now, what about from a physiological? There's one other thing I want to talk about when you wrap this point up. So what do they do afterwards?
This is where I feel like I earn my money, because what you do after, in my sincere opinion, really depends on what comes next. If that's like this, it's a wrap. There's no more competing. There's no, we're not doing a show in 2 weeks. We're not doing a show in a few days. Like, it's literally the end. Then basically it's the end. I would say ease into, water and food volume, but by and large, you're done. Everything's okay. If there's pharmaceutical diuretics in play, there might need to be something to, I don't want to say counteract, but let's say support a decision made. For instance, if you used a potassium sparing diuretic, you might actually have too much potassium and need an adjustment. Whereas if you used a sodium sparing diuretic, you might need something, but that's a separate thing. But I would say what comes next literally determines what you do now. If you're moving into competing, you obviously need to sort of rehydrate and what have you, but there also needs to be parameters, because that repletion period, your body is very sensitive to uptake, and you could sort of convince it to uptake things in an inappropriate proportion that would then make it extra hard to do the next stage. So not to dodge your question, but I would say it's as simple as don't be an asshole, but kind of do whatever you want, to listen to me very carefully because we have shit to do next week. So I can't give you the do this. I can kind of give you that's sort of the magic of paying me, because I have all this shit in a notebook somewhere.
I mean, it seems obvious, but obviously hydration, and then depending on whether you get the electrolytes in would be kind of, again, contextual, like to really load electrolytes and you've digged around with potassium spraying, and then that might be counterproductive because your potassium level is already high. In actual fact, maybe use of a diuretic where you do put potassium, like maybe it's now's the time. Get stuck into it, take half.
It's comical that it's comical that the antidote to a diuretic could actually be a diuretic, just a different variety. That's very very hard on the mind, but it's true.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely. Interesting. And then and it just depends on what's up next. Is it game over, or is it running into a show in 2 weeks? They're very, very valid. Okay, let's just wrap it up with one of the points you made. I thought was really, really important, and the running through what should be, because it doesn't always happen, but giving the guys and girls a bit of an idea of what to expect to, if you will, put their mind at ease. And I just want to kind of labor just to wrap things up, because I see, and you would probably argue otherwise, that they don't know how to diet, or they're just, not good at their craft. But I see, like on the Olympia stage, I mean, this is the pinnacle of their year and potentially like 2 year in the making, or whatever the case may be. And
career sometimes. Career in the
exactly
making.
They seem to screw it up. Like, that's all you had to do, but one thing that comes to mind, and Rolly Winkler was, to use him as an example, did the Olympia, and he was kind of like, this is Rolly's year. He's coming in big, and then I think he got fourth. I'm not very good with what they actually placed, but then he went over to Asia somewhere. It was in Japan, or did a show over there, and won the show. There was only a short duration afterwards, but nailed it, won, and looked phenomenal. I mean, you'd probably say didn't look phenomenal, still needs to diet harder, but regardless, but you get the point I'm making. I'm just taking the piss a little bit.
Right. No, I take your meaning. Yeah.
And the point I'm making is that Olympia, even for these guys, seasoned veterans, stupidly stressful environment, putting a lot of pressure on themselves. That's the only thing that I can, outside of, and maybe it's that, that stress and doing things that they probably, try and get a bit better when they should have just, let the jumbo jet land, maybe. But this high stress environment seems to be, the what can make and break. And you see the seasoned veterans, like I think Yates was always notorious for, he'd be playing mind games backstage, and he'd be, putting his feet up, not pumping up. Everyone else would be pumping up. Like, why is the Dorian pumping up? And then he'll, then go on and win the show, kind of thing. You see the guys that are more successful seem to have that whole process, whether they kind of know their body well, or they're just confident, or whatever the case may be. But if you break it down, it seems to be a lower stressed environment and one highly stressed environment. And this high stress, even if they're dialed in, and I've seen this, like I've seen athletes there look amazing one day out, and then day of show, they just look like they're 2-3 weeks out, and they look absolutely off the mark, completely. Do you really do you on board with that? Is kind of like, it does have the potential to change physiology to the point where you can just worry yourself into a watery mess and
100%
just ruin. And that's where this conversation with athlete and reassuring them and having that game plan, knowing what to expect, I think really comes into its own. Just touch on that with, I find that absolutely fascinating. That's the only thing I can put it down to.
I think there's actually two separate conversations there. One, you are 100% right. Stress is that sort of overarching psychological emotional stress is an insidious poison. It is. I mean, it ruins relationships. It ruins countries. Like, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not about to discount that in the slightest. However, I personally think it's that. Plus, I believe we've maybe blatantly gotten into an environment where athletes quite literally don't practice their craft enough. We're down to the stage where people compete once a year, maybe, and I just sincerely believe they are not good at it. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just mean by the numbers. Go back to the beginning of this conversation. We mentioned somebody like Roman Fritz, who's on a marathon of competing. Yes, that's really hard on you physically, and yes, that has some downsides. But one upside is you get good at that shit. You become a master of that shit. You know exactly what every step of it looks like and is supposed to look like. You have seen everything because you've been there. Again, it's not a coincidence that B.Chavez is one of the greatest coaches in bodybuilding. The motherfucker competed more than anyone. He's got more experience than all people. That matters. That fucking matters. Come on.
Yeah, no, that's good point. Good, yeah, no, 100%. That's in the conversation there, because all you need to do, and this is again, I keep referencing Scott Stevenson, but that's something that I would suggest something, and he goes, "Well, did you trial it? You know, did you practice it? You know, did you get the information you needed before? Don't try anything on competition day." And that's what I mentioned. The athlete that I had in Queensland, we actually we're in the opportunity where he was kind of where he needed to be, which was great, and we could. Because we got 3 weeks between shows, we did have the option of, we did like a full peak week. His whole week was, okay, this is your program, glycogen deplete before we load. We're going to do 2 days loading, 1,200 grams of carbs, 900 grams of carbs. We're going to manipulate water, peak you, come in to check in at the gym. I'll do a check-in with you. We'll pump you up for the check-in. We'll get some dumbbells. And literally he sipped his little drink, like you mentioned, pumped him up. And we had all this data. It was like, and then come comp day, this dude was such a cool cat. He was there, and it was almost like, Ryan, you're on stage soon. He's like, yeah, no worries. You know.
Yeah, he's just phoning it in. You're like, this is old fucking hat. Yeah. This is what I do. And I can't begin to tell you how valuable that is. Like, there's,
I mean, even the pros could, I mean, time their prep, not leave it to the last second, and then do a practice run. Did it work? Did you tweak anything? Did they try it? And then, I mean, not that I'm suggesting we know better than them, but
I'm not trying to indict the entire sport of bodybuilding, but I do think we've gotten. You go back, and again, I'm not trying to romanticize the past or anything, but people do that, like, bodybuilding in the late '90s was so amazing. Yeah, there was the Grand Prix circuit. There was a lot more going on. It wasn't this one-off big bloated mess for 10 months of the year and try and win the Olympia. It was a different world. And I think that, like all different worlds, it had some benefits. It had some positives that maybe are missing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that was me rambling on about stuff, and you entertaining me. I don't know if anyone found that interesting, but I certainly did. I've made a few notes on my pad. I'm always learning, Rods. Absolutely awesome. We've got a few shows this weekend, so we will do, and the guys won't get privy to this, but we'll do our regular catch up next week, and I'll give you a debrief and what happened, and we can dot I's, cross T's, and always appreciate the interaction, man. It's absolutely enjoyable and awesome from my perspective. So
100%.
Thank you so much from Adios Amigos from down under the Kabat, like this tropical paradise that I'm seemingly in, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Absolutely, man. Thanks a lot.